Welcome to the Impact Over Optics podcast, a place where real progress shines beyond appearances and distractions. Here, voices from across industries come together to share wisdom, stories, and strategies that remind us what's possible when purpose leads the way. Because true progress is not measured by how it looks, but by the impact it leaves behind. Let's get started.
All right. Welcome to Impact Over Optics. This is the podcast where we go beyond appearances and focus on what really moves the needle: authentic leadership, purposeful results, and lasting impact. I'm really happy today. I'm your host, Dave Dieffenbach, and I'm joined with my friend, Eric Lacombe. Eric is a close friend and former colleague who has taught me a lot over the years working together. He knows a lot about leadership, and I'm really looking forward to digging in. But first, a little bit more about Eric. He spent 28 years in product and software engineering, working everywhere from fast-moving startups to large Fortune 500 companies across a bunch of industries: insurance, banking, payments, animal health. He's led teams of all sizes, loves helping people work together to build meaningful, reliable solutions. And outside of work, he's a person too. He's married, proud dad of 3. He's got 2 kids in college, 1 in high school, and he's pretty involved in the community through coaching and scouting. And I have to say, he's also just a really nice guy. So Eric, thanks for joining. Just to get started, what did I miss about your intro, if anything? And tell us all a little bit about a project you're working on right now, work that's it's exciting, that you're proud of.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dave. You embellished me quite a bit there, so I appreciate that. As usual, you're trying to make me look better than I am. In terms of current project I'm working on, that I'm really proud of. At my current employer, we're working on really trying to make the pet owner experience much more kind of modern and simplistic to help the experience so that they can get the medications to their pets.
Hey, tell us all about your dog.
Yes, my dog, he's actually with me today. He comes with me pretty much every day. He's a 80-pound crazy golden retriever. We have to have certain office rules when he's around because he has stolen a couple lunches in his couple of years coming to the office as well. He enjoys going through any trash cans that people may have left him extra treats in. But he's my little inseparable friend.
That's great. To everyone listening, it's not a requirement if you work in animal health that you have pets, but it certainly helps. It always breaks the ice. We should have invited your dog on the podcast. So this month we're talking about purpose and purpose-driven leadership. And we talk a lot about my friend John, who's on this podcast as a co-host. He introduced me to Simon Sinek, who talks about your why a lot. And I'm wondering if you can just kind of start out to warming up about what's the greatest factor that drives your work today? What's your why behind the reason you lead teams, the reason you work?
Yeah, great topic. Yeah, Simon is fabulous. I was kind of introduced to some of his work back when I was at Unum, so 10, 15 years ago, when I had the pleasure of working with many great leaders. Yeah, that's how I got exposed to there. I'd say my why has been different, throughout the years, as my career's evolved, but my why for the last 10 to 15 years has really been around, trying to lead and develop people, give people opportunities, and in essence, try to, lead by example, but also kind of roll up my sleeves and do whatever I expect of others. So I'll as an example, I'll pick on when I was at Unum. I was at Unum. When I first was hired there, I told them I didn't want to manage people. I had earlier in my career, and it just wasn't something that I initially enjoyed earlier on. But after leading a couple of really large initiatives and projects, it kind of just came natural. Seemed to enjoy, working with and or for me to a degree. At that point, I was asked if I would reconsider managing people, and I thought it was a career-limiting decision to say I wouldn't. And I did, and one thing led to another. And within a couple of years, I went from not managing anybody at the company to managing 150 to 200, including our offshore team, and about 60 to 70 that were Unum employees. And I just felt a different sense of responsibility, and kind of one of the reasons that I originally wanted to do that is because I felt like a lot of the leaders that I experienced and worked with, I tried to take good bits from the ones I liked, but I found there were far fewer that I admired than I wished I did as an employee and coworker. So I felt almost like a sense of obligation of if I could help make people's lives better, in the workplace, outside of the workplace, through opportunities, then I almost started to feel an obligation that I should step up and try to do my best to do that for them.
I love that. I love it. And I will say, from someone who's worked with you but never for you, you definitely personify that. Lift your people up, guide them. I didn't actually know a lot of your history. I didn't actually realize you've managed that many people before, but it's such an important characteristic. When I talked earlier in this month, I talked about being a reluctant leader. I wonder if that's sort of similar for you too. When you started your leadership journey, you had no interest in doing it. Are you now finding yourself a very purposeful leader, like you want to lead?
Yes, yeah, I definitely think so. Yeah, I'm fine not leading as well. Yeah, I believe it's probably from being an athlete most of my life, and mainly basketball was my passion. But I was kind of one of those people who would do whatever the team needed. I was like a first point guard, but if the team needed me to score, I'd score. If they needed me to hand out assists and get other people involved, I did that. If they needed me to rebound, I'd go underneath and box people out and do whatever I needed to do to try to get rebounds. I feel like, I just like to be multi-purposeful, and I find that to also be good in leadership because I can kind of bounce around and help wherever is needed within my team or outside of my team to help the organization.
Yeah, you help where's needed. I should have guessed you'd be bringing in sports analogies, right? Because you're such a Red
Sorry about
Sox
that.
fan or all those New England fans. And if you're not a New England fan, I sympathize with you. New England wins too much. We can let them start to lose a few things. Although they've had a rough stretch of it. One thing we talked about earlier this month too is this idea of leadership as something you might learn skills with. And I'm wondering, can you share something about as you've grown as a leader, as you become more purpose driven, what have you observed or had to unlearn that you thought was going to be easy? Do you have any examples there?
Yeah, I'd say just observing communication to me is still the key. I mean, it's the key to a lot of things in life. And I find the more that you can openly communicate with your team, the better everybody is. It's obviously still a fine line balance. The higher kind of move up in organizations because there's times when you can share things and times you can't necessarily share things that are being discussed or gone on. But how do you walk that line of balance of keeping people informed? In terms of things I've had to unlearn, I found a few leaders and managers that I had to learn how to communicate better with them because I found many times you might raise a question or raise something that you notice, and sometimes people run with it without the right context and understanding, and then they turn it into something that it isn't. So I think, had to learn how to read people better and understand how to communicate with them, especially people senior of me in organizations, because a lot of people, I believe, want to be problem solvers, myself included, but many times you're not necessarily asking them to solve a problem. You're trying to figure out how do you raise the right issues or make them aware of things, but that doesn't necessarily mean go take action and create chaos that doesn't necessarily need to be created.
That happens in relationships too, doesn't it? Not just in work. So tell me a little bit more about that. You've learned these, you've unlearned them. What actually have you learned? Then how do you communicate up and vertically? How do you make that clear? Do you just right up front say in bold, don't take action, this is information only, or do you have a more subtle way of?
No, that you pretty much described what I've
Really?
learned. With certain people, again, it almost depends on the relationship. I do think I think a shortcoming a lot of people that I notice who try to get more into leadership roles or exposed to those things, they don't understand the read the room mentality as well. So I think, you don't treat, I try to treat everybody equal from a purpose and values perspective of how I treat relationships, but I don't treat everybody equal in terms of how I need to follow up with them or how I need to communicate in certain instances. What you just described, there's certain, leaders I've worked with that I definitively have learned I have to be like, this is just for your information. Do not take any action. And I've literally used those types of terms to roll something up to them that I believe they need to be made aware of. And there's other people that I know I don't have to say that to because they just, understand it. So again, it's kind of reading the room or reading the audience.
So is that has that become more of an intuition, or are you very planful? Like when you're working with someone, are you literally creating a matrix of how to communicate, or do you just use your gut now because you've done it long enough?
More or less my gut now. It's kind of a mental matrix, for lack of a better term. But earlier in my career, when I was coaching somebody who worked for me, who was kind of curious how to read the room because of a couple of meetings that we'd been in. I worked with him and we literally whiteboarded the 6 people that were going to be in the meeting, and I wrote like, this person cares about this, and this one's going to care about that, and this one's going to care about this. And we literally strategized how to make sure our first slide or two hit what everybody on there was going to be like important to them because they all had different things that mattered to them to a degree. Yeah. And that way we could have a better further discussion without people trying to sidetrack us too much or people, kind of being curious about something. So that was something I found very, helpful, but kind of gridded that out. But as I've made relationships with people, I just kind of mental note that myself.
Yeah. Let me summarize that and see if I get it right. Earlier in your career, it's okay to take your time and be methodical and practice and understand. But as you grow in an organization, you can trust your intuition more and just kind of go with it. Is that kind of what you're
Correct.
saying?
Yeah. And for sure. At least
Yeah.
that's what I've, found to date.
Well, so in projects or teams you're leading, are there signs or symptoms you can actually tell when your leadership is impactful, or maybe the alternative when you've actually had some challenges? What kind of things are you looking for?
Yeah, definitely. Again, it gets down to reading people. I think psychology goes into a lot of, how you interact when you become a leader. And I sense it. I know there's some people who really I respect and they respect me a lot, but they don't always respond well to sometimes my style in certain situations. I do think the tougher messages are sometimes the harder ones to deliver because everybody takes feedback differently. Sometimes it's hard to kind of be as accepting of that. So I just try to read faces or tone of responses and when or where I need to, handle it either one-on-one or in different settings because everybody's a little bit different in that.
Yeah, they definitely are. One of the things I struggle with, and I'm pretty open about it on this podcast, and I'm open with anyone who listen, is doing exactly what you said in a remote world. And I know you work hybrid now. You work in an office, sometimes at home. What tips or tricks have you learned in leading when you have to read a room, but you're not in the room? How have you been able to find that to be successful?
It's definitely made it a lot harder. I can say that, from my perspective. And I think all of us, myself included, at times, if you don't have the visual, like what we have now, with video or whatever, it's a little easier sometimes, via chat to get a little more passionate or heated per se when you don't have the opportunity to read the eyes of the person on the other side of the exchange. What I've learned, especially any sort of difficult situation or thing that I need to do, I've to set up more of a video call and a conversation, even if it's just a quick 10-minute catch up on the side to get aligned or on the same page just from reading the tone or the understanding of either the voice or the words. So it's definitely been harder. And I have personally found myself at times I'll jot more notes to myself or things like that. And I'll try to follow up and learn more. I've always also been try to get to know people a little bit. I'm not going to go into a meeting, I'll say, with 5 people I've never met with before and try to go into with a preconceived notes or whatever. So I'll make notes. So sometimes it will take me, a few times with different leaders or different people before I'm maybe a little more comfortable, a little more understanding of how I'm going to, communicate or work with them the most effective way, especially you may need to influence them to get certain things done. It's kind of trying to understand them, get them in a relationship as quick as possible, and then figure out how you use that to help, achieve whatever needs to be achieved for the company.
Yeah. It's such a thoughtful, it ties back to what you said earlier. I can almost picture you sitting down with yourself with a whiteboard and game planning it out because it does require more work when you're working remotely. I found the same thing, especially with the asynchronous nature of communications. We always had that in the office, but in the office, we could always just, grab someone by the ear and take them aside. And it does just take more time. And I think that's the important thing, time and planning and not to assume.
It's tough. I mean, in the office too, you used to be able to see people. So you could see somebody whose head's down if you had a question for them, or you could see, they were doing something more clearly. And now you don't know that. So we live on Microsoft Teams at my current company, and I'll get 20 Teams messages every hour from different people, and they all almost believe and expect you're going to respond to them instantaneously. So it's very challenging at times to handle all the various interactions as quickly as people expect you to handle them.
Well, let's take a small left turn here. We spend a lot of time in the office talking about the office, but I also know that you're a father. You've done scouts, you've done coaching in sports, so you've taken leadership outside of the office too, and you're quite proud of your family, and you're always talking about that. But I just love to prompt you to share maybe a story of where your leadership style has worked outside of the office, and where you've been extremely proud of some of the results there as well.
Yeah, I don't know, through my children, I'd say mostly. In many ways, I have tried to be a very involved parent, across all 3 of my children. They all are very different. So I've had, different types of experiences with each of them. My oldest son was, very active in scouts. He's a senior in college now, but, it's been very fun to watch him grow, into a leader. He was just very involved in several political campaigns in the most recent elections. He leads his school's mock trial team, and he drives everybody to their tournaments. He's very active. It's just very fun. And as a parent, good to see him grow and do those types of things. And my middle son is a freshman in college. His leadership style is quite a bit different. He's a little more introverted, not quite as extroverted as my other children or even myself. But just seeing how he takes ownership and drives things. He currently is managing his college's basketball team, and it's been fun to engage and hear some of the stories in the early part for him, and that he just goes the extra mile, and he's doing those like little extra things that a coach will appreciate and know without being asked to do it. It's just been fun to see how he's, just kind of done that on his own naturally, which I, just think is through various lessons and other parts. And then, last but not least, my daughter, sophomore in high school, very active field hockey player, pretty much year round. She was just named a captain on her team this year as a sophomore, which isn't very common. And she was just an amazing, teammate, and got all kinds of accolades for how she treated, her teammates and partners. She happens to play at a co-op, so it's like half the people are from the school she goes to, which is a small
Mm.
private school, and the other half are from a local public school. And our communities aren't necessarily super close. The schools are about a 25, 30-minute ride at best, but she's probably the only child on the team that comes from our private school that you don't know which school she's from, which I take, pride in that she's very just kind of, on a natural leader and gets along with everybody and, doesn't really have any biases there, which is,
Eh,
and been exciting as a parent to watch.
I love the obvious pride in both your family and in the teams you work with, and I'm glad I prompted you to talk about your family because I know that you're really proud of them. The leadership style you talked about earlier, your purpose, your why, does that translate outside, or is your leadership style at home as a parent just different?
Yeah, probably just different. I think my leadership style at home is pretty much, be the chief of staff to my wife and let my wife be the more natural leader and everything.
You're
Yeah,
smart.
yes, yeah, no, my wife's amazing. Yeah, so my leadership style at home's quite different, than my leadership style in the office to a degree. From that standpoint. But it's also similar because, as I alluded to in sports earlier, it's kind of like what role do you need to play in what situation, within a team, internal, external, all around. Yeah, that's that's something that again I take pride in. When I was actually hired at a previous company a couple of jobs ago, the man who hired me told me he pretty much only liked to hire multi-sport athletes. That's how he defined it, and that's what he got the sense of me through asking questions, and that somebody who you could be hired into a role, but you could kind of be willing and able to do anything that was needed, not just kind of fit in the box of what your title was. Yeah, so again, I've taken pride in that as a person, and definitely I hadn't ever thought of it that way from a work perspective. That when I went look back at other roles, it had always been that way. When I was in many jobs, I feel like probably 10 to 15% of my time is spent on my direct title, and the rest of the time is spent on whatever's needed to make a project successful or make people on my team successful or whatever. It isn't truly just doing like software testing in my instance. It's just what my title is. I do a fair amount of it and I help troubleshoot a lot, but more of it's around, helping product partners and commercial partners and external customer partners and my team, to achieve what we need to achieve as a group.
I think what I really took away from that, one, that you learned from a mentor, but what you learned from the mentor is this idea of multi-sport athletes. That really resonates with me. That's literally what my career has been like too. And I've had managers say before, you don't have to have the MBA, you can learn on the job. But I would say never stop being curious, right? That's pretty important. And when I'm reflecting now on all the people I know who play multiple sports and have played multiple sports, they usually have multiple coaches, right? They're learning all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, that's, again, where I feel nobody's perfect. So I've always tried to take little bits and pieces from all the people around me and continue to kind of grow and morph, from all those bits and pieces from, different leaders. And sometimes I learn as much from somebody on my team. I've recently hired an associate level young guy who's early 20s right out of college. And I've learned a lot from him, in the 6 to 9 months he's been with us, different work style, different, things. And it's, kind of remarkable in my mind just to kind of see the different ways people work from different generations or the thoughts that they have and, why they think a certain way. And again, how do you, make sure that you get the best out of everybody and set them up to be successful.
Yeah, I applaud you for taking the time to do that. You made a comment earlier, and I may have missed the details, but you think you spend a small percentage of time actually on your job title. How much time do you think you're actually spending on the management of people? And I know it's a part of your job title, but what percentage of your time is spent on that?
Yeah, I don't know, probably 25% to a third, but I'd say it's more subtle, I'll say many times, because it's, again, me more rolling up my sleeves, maybe helping them and checking their thought process. How do you think about this? Show me how you did that. Oh, did you think of this? It's not, I'll say, command control management by any means. I'm the opposite of that. So, and a lot of the chats that I have with people, are like me just trying to get information or probe them for how they're thinking. So, I'll say a decent percentage, across the board, but it's more like on the job. How do you coach or grow somebody versus like, one-on-one time with them, just talking about, things in general. It's more, kind of a combination of those two things together.
Yeah, I like the informality. So just to summarize what you're talking about too, is leadership for you is just sort of ingrained in your day to day. You're not waking up and spending 2 hours on leadership tasks. It's just sort of interwoven, except those times where you have to do leadership tasks, right? Like coaching or reviews.
Yeah.
You're constantly mentoring.
Yeah. When I was at Unum, for instance, with a pretty big team, as I said earlier, one of the guys I worked with was shocked because we had to roll up status reports for leaders above us, which has always been one of my least favorite tasks. But he couldn't believe that I didn't require my team. I had 6 managers reporting to me at the time. I didn't make any of them give me a status report. And I still rolled up everything that our group was working on. And it's because I had ongoing conversations with them. Just have a weekly one-on-one, and that's all it was. Like every day I touch base with pretty much everybody, either in a quick video chat or just via online chat. Even in today's world, like I didn't ever go, an extended period without checking in with somebody and getting a sense of what was going on or not going on. So I try to get my updates and understanding of how things were going across a wide breadth of initiatives by just kind of constant, being in touch and communication again, and not full way, so to speak, or not, you need to tell me A, B, and C. It was just more like, how's this going? What about that? Garnering what I needed. And obviously when you get that, sometimes you have to dig in much further because you realize something might not be going quite as well as you need it to. It's completely covered and, they've got everything you need. You don't have to worry about that anymore. You can go focus on the ones that do.
Yeah. The cool thing about that model though, is you also actually showed them, I'm not just in your business. I'm actually learning so that you don't have to constantly be writing summary documents. You knew enough. And I actually really appreciate that leadership style where people are checking in and supportive, asking questions, but then not bothering you with status updates if they already know the information, right? And that's a great leadership tip. Yeah. Cool. So tell me about with your family, just one last time, go back to them.
Yeah.
When you're mentoring them, are you whiteboarding with them? I have to know, are you sitting down and whiteboarding with them, like how to talk, how to get the date for prom? Are you doing any of that?
Not really. I haven't done as much of that as I probably should. I do a little bit more of that probably with my middle son, thinking through situations and things like that with him, than I do with the other two. Again, I think some of it's just the curiosity and trying to teach them, to be curious, because I do think being curious is what, makes people, grow and get better, because you ask more questions and you realize you want to go learn a little more about this thing versus that thing or whatever, and not just, assume. I do think an interesting paradigm is with TikTok and all these other online things. Yeah, sometimes I do believe, my children will believe they're like an expert in something because they, watched a 20-minute YouTube video on it. And realizing that might be the tip of the iceberg of that thing. And if you're interested and curious, like keep digging and digging and digging. Don't just think 20 minutes and you're an expert type of thing. Because I do think that the world's swaying that way a little bit with the amount of media and things thrown our way.
Yeah, the quick hit information that is hard to verify. Sometimes people think they're the expert. I think that's one area where you can lead to is just to kind of put the flag down and say, you can slow down and listen and learn. Yeah. You don't have to be in such a hurry to be an expert, right?
Exactly. My older son, he, as I mentioned, he's pretty involved. He's been involved in politics since he was a little kid. He's loved politics. It's something he's been passionate about. But, we did do a lot of mentoring, coaching with him in particular on like trying to understand and read all sides, so don't just be like, way on the right or way on the left or wherever he would fall on the spectrum, try to look at it from every angle and lens. Yeah, that was kind of our constant feedback and advice to him for mentor and leadership for my wife and I. And it's been, fun to watch him, grow and evolve and definitely learn.
Eric, it's been so fun to reconnect with you and catch up. And a lot of the things you're saying are reminding me of why I enjoyed working with you so much. We like to ask one closing question of all of our guests. And basically, it's a simple one. If listeners walk away with one message today, what would you want them to walk away with?
I'd say walk away with, just think about being authentic, get to know people. And get to know situations, and apply that knowledge and understanding to anything, because I think that applies to life. It applies to work. I think we all can easily make assumptions and understandings when you see somebody for the first time or see a situation, but really trying to authentically get to know and understand it, and then figure out how you can shape what you know to help, make it better or grow or be different, I think is, super important. And I think that many times is a underutilized leadership skill. I'll just say one last thing. When I was leaving Unum 10 plus years ago, there was an engineer there, software engineer, who I didn't know, never had worked with him in the 8 years I'd been there. I interacted with him for about the last 6 months I was there a few times, and he sat not super far from me. When I was leaving, I went over to him and just said, yeah, I'll miss you, good luck, whatever. He said to me he'd been working at Unum over 20 years, and I was the first manager that he'd ever had, and I wasn't his manager, mind you, that took the time to get to know him and ever asked him about his family and like checked in with him in 20 plus years, which it almost made me sad. It made me proud, obviously, that meant something to him, but literally somebody I hardly knew, but just the fact that, in getting to know him a little bit, because we sat in the same area and we're in a couple of same projects, trying to make an authentic relationship. And it's amazing, just how, those little things can matter, as a leader or a person.
It's huge, Eric, and it ties back to your why, right? And I love that closing, because you're stay curious. And if If I take one thing away from this from you, it's this multi-sport athlete concept too. And I want to thank you for joining us on Impact Over Optics podcast. We're wrapping up now, but it's been great talking to you, Eric. I'm Dave Dieffenbach. Remember, authentic change always outlasts appearance. Until next time, lead with purpose and leave a real mark.
Thanks again for joining us on the Impact Over Optics podcast. We hope today's insights sparked fresh ideas and reminded you of the power of purpose-driven work. Please share this episode with others who believe in real change, and join us again as we continue to look beyond appearances and focus on the impact that truly lasts.